Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Some time ago, I was blessed to sit down with my dear friends Greg and Lisa Popcak of More to Life and Ave Maria Radio and EWTN, and I had given a talk called Satan's 12 Attacks on Marriage. We have that list for you on AveMariaRadio.net. The day after the talk, Greg and Lisa and I spoke with each other about different parts of that list and how Satan really does act out those 12 areas. Let's go on to that conversation. Satan's 12 attacks on marriage. The first is the divorce mentality that even Catholic couples get into marriage with an escape hatch, the back door is open. I invite you to comment on that.
It's part of what St. John Paul referred to as the disposable culture. You know, when I'm done with this thing, then I should just get rid of it. And the same thing is true. You know, I will be with you for as long as you're useful to me. And when you stop being, at least in my mind, useful to me, then we move on. But I think that underneath that is that we all love our comfort zones more than we love each other, right? And so the sacramental grace of marriage challenges us to move past that. But if you don't have that sacramental mindset, then everybody comes to a point in a marriage where I'm as comfortable as I'm ever going to be with you. And if I'm going to have a closer relationship with you, I have to be willing to risk being uncomfortable. And most people don't want to do that, right? And I don't have a reason to do that. I finally got to a place where I'm comfortable, and I'm going to sit here very well, but having that escape hatch it's really about, I've gotten to the place where I in order to be closer, I would need to be uncomfortable to get there, and that feels wrong somehow. It feels uncomfortable, right? And so I guess that means that we're done. Whereas with a sacramental mindset, we're able to say, God gave you to me so that I'd be uncomfortable, so that I'd grow in ways that I'd never grow if you weren't part of my life, and vice versa, right? And by saying yes to the things that you're asking from me, by saying yes to the needs that He's placed on your heart, especially when it causes me to stretch and grow and change, God is giving me an invitation through you, to grow in ways that just don't come naturally to me, and vice versa. But if I don't have that mindset from the beginning, then it doesn't make sense. Why would I, we've gone as far as we can go. We're done now, right? But if I have that sacramental mindset, I realize, wait, there's supposed to be more than just our comfort at stake. But that's why the escape hatch is so important for so many people, because if I don't have that escape hatch, then I don't have a reason to be uncomfortable with you.
As you're saying that, and it's just so true, I think that, we get very committed to our comfort zones. But there's also this idea of, I married you to aggrandize me, to build me up, to make me feel wonderful, to make me feel spectacular. And while there is part of that in Christian marriage, because you want to build that person up in terms of, I'm going to help you to become more virtuous. I'm going to help you grow closer to Christ. I'm going to let you see how much God loves you through my eyes. But that's not aggrandizing of that person and all of their faults. That's saying, let's go toward the light. Let's go toward Christ, and let's grow to be more like Him, not more of our worst selves. And so if you have somebody who enters into marriage not understanding the sacramentality of it, and they want to be aggrandized by their spouse, and then over time their spouse starts having needs of their own, or needs to be built up a little bit in their own right because they've been giving so much, or whatever that is, it doesn't only make you uncomfortable, it shatters your idea of the false God that you are. And so you want to get out, because that hurts and that's scary. And unless we really understand the sacramentality of it, and we're participating in the sacraments of the church, we don't have a way to sort that out besides running up.
I'd love to dive into that, but I just want to move through as much as possible. The pornography thing. Every time someone calls about this issue, you present this as not an individual problem, but a couple issue to deal with together.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to say, okay, the spouse, and it's usually the husband, but sometimes it can be the woman as well, and women are using pornography more than ever. But to say, the person who is viewing pornography, they're the problem. They're the pornography addict, and so it's their problem. They should go off and get fixed. At the heart of the sin of lust, there's a divine longing for communion. I talk about this in my book, Broken Gods, where I look at the seven deadly sins, and so the seven deadly sins are actually twistings, Satan's kind of perversion of seven divine longings that each of us have, and so each of us longs to be known and in communion with another person, especially in a particularly intimate way, right? A lot of us, we have wounds that make that hard to do, right? We have wounds that make it hard for us to give ourselves to another. We have wounds that make it difficult for us to receive the other. And so pornography fills that gap very often. It gives me the illusion of communion without all the work, without having to heal those wounds. If a person is going to really recover from pornography use, they have to do work on their relationships. And you really can't work on a relationship by yourself. That's not to say that it's your spouse's fault in any way that you're using pornography. That's your choice, right? Mm-hmm. We are responsible for our own choices. But we can be responsible for healing, for each other's healing, whatever those wounds are. And the sacrament of marriage is meant to force those wounds to the surface so that God can deal with them and so God can heal them. And so when we run into those things, instead of being kind of shocked and appalled that those sins are there and those weaknesses and wounds are there, they're serious. We have to recognize them for what they are, but to be able to face them together and learn how can we learn to love each other through this and heal each other from this so that we can give and receive ourselves to each other the way God wants us to, as opposed to settling for something that will fill the gap without us having to do that work.
It's too long to go into, but truly the root of this is in attachment in childhood, where people have not had enough of their needs of I'm loved, I'm accepted, I'm cherished, met by the adults in their lives, the parents in their lives, grandparents who are supposed to be there and be the first face of God to their children. And that's most of us now, for a zillion reasons. That's not no parent in the world ever sets out to not fill the cup of their child. But that's happening more for women now than it's ever happened before, because men as little boys were always sort of like, they could be cuddled till they were like 2 or 3. And then they had to go hang out with the guys and go play sports and get pushed away a little bit. And so for years we saw the effect of that as pornography being more of a man's thing. Now the same thing is happening to girls. Get out there and succeed and do these things and daycare and I don't have time to hug you and I don't, a lot of the same exact thing is happening. And so we're seeing the same rise, unfortunately, with women. But either way, and I think with men being the ones who it's been such a high number of for so long, women have really, at least in the church, have come to acknowledge that when their husband is engaging in pornography, it is a ripping of your heart, because it is so akin to being cheated on.
Because that's what it is. It
is. And for a long time, people wouldn't let women acknowledge that because there was no human contact, But it is in our souls and in everything we are. It is. But in being able to acknowledge the pain of that now, if the man is willing and repentant, you can really work on healing the attachment wounds of either one of you, because we know how to do that more than ever. So there is hope.
And I just, while I appreciate the awareness that has occurred because of the kind of treating pornography as an addiction issue, I think the downside of that is, and we run into this in the practice a lot, is where, men are being sent off by their wives to go and get fixed. And the answer then is that the man just tries really hard to just not have those feelings anymore. That's not helping that's not helping his relationship skills. That's not helping, and so, we'll meet the person there. But the goal is then to try to bring the spouse in so that they can work through their relationship stuff, so that they can learn to give and receive each other as fully as they possibly can to heal that wound. And again, I'm not blaming the spouse for that pornography issue. That's the pornography user's choice, and that's their sin. But the solution is very much rooted in relationship, not so much the addiction model.
What you're listening to is a conversation I had with Dr. Greg and Lisa Popcak on the Good News Cruise about Satan's 12 attacks on marriage. We have that list on AveMariaRadio.net, and we are continuing this conversation on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Some time ago on the Good News Cruise, I was blessed to talk with Dr. Greg and Lisa Popcak about Satan's 12 attacks on marriage. And I'm going to continue that conversation. In this segment, we launch into the concept of radical individualism and how that destroys marriages from the get-go. Let's go on to the conversation.
I talked yesterday about this radical self-centeredness of the modern narrative, modern man, and maybe we can merge that with that concept of a contraceptive mentality. And I'm not talking about NFP, just generally, children are something to be protected from because they take away from your freedom, your autonomy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that going back to Lisa's point about attachment wounds, right? Okay, so for folks who don't know, attachment is formed in the first 5 years of life, and it's basically the degree to which when I call out, somebody's going to respond to me, and it creates this very deep, not just psychological but biological sense, like something around the nerves called a myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath actually, it's like the insulation on an extension cord. And it's what enables electrical impulses to travel down the nerve cell quickly. If I have an extension cord that's frayed, right, what happens? It sparks, smokes, it's not efficient. It's not delivering the electricity down the line. When you have a very thin myelin sheath, the same thing is happening inside of you. And whenever you experience, especially affection or intimacy, your social brain short circuits because you don't have the thick myelin sheath around that. The way that myelin sheath develops is through affection, especially in the first 5 years. And so when you have somebody who doesn't receive that kind of affection and affirmation that they need, especially in the early years, intimacy feels threatening to them. It feels overwhelming to them. And so the idea of raising a child, when I have so many of my own needs and hurt, like giving myself to another person is painful. Like not just on a psychological level, but on a physical level, if I have attachment wounds. Because physically, I just don't physically have it to give. So the idea of having this child who I need to give all this affection and love to, it feels threatening on a neurological level, not just a psychological one.
Well, to add to that, I think the secondary terror in that is I need that attention. I need that attachment to my spouse. What do you mean I have to share this person with somebody else?
Oh.
So suddenly your spouse, and we see it on both sides. I have seen so many women who say, my husband loves the kids more than he loves me. He spends all this time with them, he pays attention to them, he thinks they're so delightful, and now suddenly I'm second. And certainly in men, what do you mean she's exhausted at the end of the day? She's given everything to the kids. What do I get? And so there's a terror in folks who have been wired, as Greg is saying here, that maybe I can love my spouse and they can love me and we can be equal and we can keep each other safe. But when we start adding a child, that's terrifying. But maybe I can have one, because as our society now has coined the term, that can be my mini-me. And I can be aggrandized kind of through raising this person to be as perfect as I want to be. But then you start adding more than one. And that gets really real, because you have to negotiate, and you have to share love with two people, and you have to open your heart more. And opening your heart more when it's been so damaged is terrifying. So we have to protect ourselves from that. And I thought you said that so brilliantly last night when you asked the group, how when we talk about contraception, what do we call it? And we call it protection. And we're thinking protection against what? Protection against the terror of having to not be loved enough, of having to share love with yet more human beings and not ever getting that wound.
And that therefore feeds into things like busyness, exhaustion, distraction, financial anxiety, the material way in which we are convinced to live. I mean, every person here has gone through different levels of financial anxiety. Let's talk about kind of the sexual confusion that's happening in the culture right now, the undermining of difference, male and female, fatherhood and motherhood.
I think the reason that Christ received so many wounds is to heal all the wounds that we are all walking around with. As we talk about, what we've been talking about for the last few minutes within men and women as God created us. And the more we experience more wounding in our society, less attachment. I know very few people who are able to make the financial sacrifice to have one parent in the home when their children are small anymore. Our society is setting us up for incredible attachment wounds. And so so much of the gender confusion, so much of all that we're seeing going on in the world is just wounded inner children screaming for somebody to teach them that they're loved, to give them a sense of order, to tell them that they're going to be okay, and it's just spinning out of control in a way that Satan is just attacking us on every front, and then turning us against each other when anybody tries to say, hey, there's a better way. There's a way to heal.
You know, we've seen the breakdown of what it means to be a man and woman in general. And so kids who are growing up don't have clear models for what a healthy sense of masculinity or femininity actually looks like. They recognize that they don't necessarily always fit inside the caricature of what masculinity or femininity should be. And so they don't know where they fit. Mm-hmm. And so there's a narrative that comes along that says, well, you're non-binary, or you fit in this way.
Right, you don't
you're
fit,
transgender.
therefore you fit, yeah.
The secular world has a story for them that makes them feel heard and seen. I think that Christians kind of buy into, not buy into it, but accidentally feed this when we have these sort of very stereotypical kind of ideas. It is very true that men and women are different, but it can be difficult to speak of those differences intelligently. And when we try to speak of them in very broad terms, what ends up happening is we end up with these caricatures that some people don't fit into. Mm-hmm. And what we end up communicating is, well, you're less of a man and you're less of a woman. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, for example, what St. John Paul said, it's not, being a man or a woman isn't really about the things that you like or the things that you prefer or the jobs that you do. It's about serving the other through the body that God gave you. And, as a man, my masculinity shines out when I serve others, especially my wife, through the body that God gave me. And her femininity shines out when she serves others through the body that gave her. And so, that's a very broad definition, right? But it's a very affirming definition, too, because there are a lot of men in particular who don't fit the kind of classic caricature of what masculinity is. But they're no less masculine, right, than the men who do. And because as long as both men serve others through the masculine body that God gave them. And so that broad understanding of masculinity or femininity that St. John Paul put forth in the Theology of the Body, I think is very freeing. Yeah. But I don't think anybody, even most Catholics, don't know that.
That actually is very good. So I guess as a final thing then, just considering the reality that we all exist at different levels of family life, third-party intrusion, forgetting about the fact that there is an intrinsic union of this marriage and family.
I mean, I think, again, because we're not teaching couples what marriage is supposed to be, like, for example, there are a lot of people who believe that your spouse shouldn't be your best friend because women can't be men's best friend or men can't be women's best friend because we're just different, right? And so women should find that fellowship with other women and men should find that fellowship with other men, right? We don't. That's a very popular Christian belief, believe it or not.
Meanwhile, the two have become one, so we better be able to share everything together.
But that's not. I mean, a lot of Christians really bought into the kind of John Gray, Mars and Venus.
Oh,
thing,
yeah,
right.
I that book, yeah.
Right, and some of it makes sense because there are very big differences between men and women, but we're different for each other, not different from each other. Uh-huh. But I think that a lot of Christians, Catholics and Protestants, kind of buy into the idea that no, we're different from each other. Therefore, we can get along as best as we can, but ultimately we're going to find our support elsewhere.
I think that this is especially true for trying to remain close as an extended family in this crazy culture we have in the United States where we no longer stay in the same neighborhood. We no longer stay in the same village. When my mother was growing up, all of her aunts and uncles and cousins all lived in the same apartment building in New York City. So if her mother needed a break, she'd say, go upstairs and hang out with Aunt Mary. We don't have that anymore. And so parents of adult children who have gotten married desperately want to hold the family together. They miss their children. They want to see their grandchildren. And it's getting it had become more and more difficult to do all of that because of distance, because of kids moving away. But I think that if we do as what Greg said, look at ourselves as how can we support our adult children in being the best couple they can be, in learning to love God together, in supporting them and raising their children to feel supported by us so they don't have to do it all alone, but also support them in raising their children to be Catholic. that's very different than, what do you mean we're going to do Christmas at your house because you have 3 kids under the age of 5 and they want to open presents under their own Christmas tree? We've always done it this way.
Right.
Our priest took us aside, actually rode with us to our rehearsal dinner because he knew something was up with both sides of our family. And he said, there's one thing I want you to know before we get out of this car. Tomorrow, when I pronounce you man and wife, you are each other's family. Everybody else just becomes your support system. And if they can support you in loving God and each other, they can be let in. And if they're not supporting you in loving God and each other, then you have to kind of temper when you can let them in and how you can let them in. And it was very important to us because as 2 very young, newly married people, we were used to being part of those families. Mm-hmm. And suddenly somebody who we admired and who helped us enter into the sacrament of marriage was telling us, no. The point from here on in is the 2 have become one and helping each other be everything you can be in this life. And that's the purpose that we as parents of adult children have to support and encourage. And that doesn't mean we drop out. It means we say, in everything we're asking of our children, everything we want to do with our children, oh, I'd love to have the whole family go to the zoo on Saturday if you live close enough. Does that work for you and the kids? Does that work for your schedule? Or do you need something else from us? So it's not demands, it's not pressure. It's we love you, we support you, we want to spend time with you. Mm-hmm. But how can we also make that work for you guys? Because you're the ones in the trenches now.
You know, that's about as beautiful a place to end this. Greg, Lisa, thank you for your time.